I'm back with a panel of experts to discuss this. Caitlin Collins first, our chief White House correspondent, to you. This was a combative speech and not at all subtle.
A very political speech. I think, with the exception of the speech that he gave on the anniversary of January 6th at the Capitol, this might be the most political, most forceful speech in that sense that he has given since taking office. And it's a bit of a surprise because we had spoken to White House officials earlier. We asked, he is someone who strayed from naming Trump very many times during his first year in office. He often stayed away from that. So as a White House reporter, to hear him come out so quickly and name drop him so fast and talk about basically the brand of extremism that he thinks Trump has founded within the Republican Party, that clearly he thinks is thriving, not in the sense that he wants it to, he came out very quickly and said Trump and said MAGA time and time again. It was a very political attack against those Republicans. He tried very hard to draw a distinction between Republicans and Republicans who style themselves after Donald Trump. Of course, whether or not they take that distinction remains to be seen. A very political speech by President Biden as this basically full frontal attack on what the White House has branded MAGA Republicans.
An attack on MAGA Republicans, Evan, and a defense, as he put it, of democracy. He literally framed this as a battle between light and darkness.
Yeah, look, it's clear this is a speech Joe Biden's wanted to give for a very long time. For the last 18 months, he has needed to legislate. He's needed to operate within the boundaries of what Washington would permit. But there has been a growing sense in his mind that actually the threat is much graver than just a political problem. As he said tonight, a really memorable moment was too much of what's happening in this country is not normal. He's appealing to what I think he believes is how a lot of Americans feel when they hear about playing footsie with political violence or the idea of throwing out a free and fair election. And he's appealing to them and saying, look, I know I'm drawing lines here, but I think that a lot of Americans are going to be on the side of the line that I draw.
Well, let's talk a little bit about one of the lines that he's drawing there. The president really did step up his criticism of MAGA Republicans directly. Let's listen.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. Now, I want to be very clear up front. Not every Republican, not even the majority of Republicans are MAGA Republicans. Not every Republican embraces their extreme ideology. I know, because I've been able to work with these mainstream Republicans. But there's no question that the Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans. And that is a threat to this country.
All right, Scott, there was a lot in that excerpt to dissect there, really. He says not all Republicans, maybe not even a majority, are MAGA Republicans. He talked about how he can work with some Republicans. How will this land?
Yeah, but there's not a single Republican in the country he's endorsing for election or re-election. I mean, he's not going to go out and campaign for Republicans that he likes in their Senate races or in their House races. This was a very, very partisan speech. I mean, his core message to me was, if you don't vote Democrat, we don't have a democracy anymore. So that's not going to land very well at all with any Republican voter, no matter what kind of Republican they consider. As I was listening to this, it sounded like a convention speech to me. There's a lot of polling out there right now that show a majority of Democrats do not want him to run for re-election. I thought this was candidly less about the midterms and more about convincing Democrats that he's up for a re-election campaign. I'll just say one final tactical thing. I do think it's smart for them to try to put Trump at the center of politics right now. If Republicans can stay focused on issues, they'll do better. If they stay focused on Trump, they'll do worse. He knows that, so it's not an incorrect impulsive tactic there.
It was right away. I mean, he mentioned Donald Trump's name right away.
Within minutes.
And then framed the whole speech around that. Eva, you hear this talk about this being a political speech, and I don't think you could ignore any of the references to MAGA Republicans there. But for supporters of Joe Biden, for some of the voters that you've been speaking to out on the trail there, if you do believe that democracy, small d, not political democracy, but democracy is at stake, is this the type of defense that they've been wanting to hear?
Absolutely, without a doubt. And something else that really stuck out to me is that he almost seemed to sort of be reclaiming patriotism. Often you hear Republicans argue that they are the pro-America party, right? The Democrats are not patriotic enough. But what was more pro-USA than this speech? And I think this is exactly what what Democratic voters wanted to hear. We honor the will of the people, right? A nod to our democracy, but also a nod to preserving reproductive rights. He is the president of all America. You mentioned before, too much of what is happening is not normal in this country. We are still at our core a democracy. I mean, all of these things. It was a very, very patriotic speech, and I think that that is a lot of what Democratic voters across the country, they want to be patriotic too. They want to be part of the American story too, and I think he spoke to that.
And McCabe, he made a direct plea to have violence out of politics. There is no place for violence in politics, he says. He referenced the fact that you can't be an insurrectionist and be for democracy. For the people who are in law enforcement and to an extent are caught in the middle of this, is this something they want to hear?
No question. No question. People in law enforcement and people within, I think, government more broadly want to hear national political figures, to include, of course, the president, to come out and absolutely call out political violence. Everything from local school board officials to local election officials to my own former colleagues at the FBI. No place in our country right now. They sense very personally and daily the rising tide of threats that they face. And I think those things will be taken positively. On the other hand, I think people would like to have seen a bit more references to accountability. There really wasn't much talk about what we're doing about those insurrectionists. It was merely calling out the fact that nobody should support an insurrection. So I think it's a positive moment for those folks in law enforcement and in government, but maybe would like to have seen more as well.